Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 45, and today we are finishing the Young Jack Sparrow series by covering the spin-off book, The Tale of Billy Turner and Other Stories. This book is called a super special and contains multiple things. The main part of the book is the full-length 160-page book that is essentially Bootstrap Bill's origin story, and how he meets Arabella Smith and the crew of the Fleur de Mort. After that, there are 5 short stories that were essentially either deleted scenes from other books or stories that appeared in the Disney Adventures magazine at the time or online. And then after that, there is actually a neat little section that describes all of the major characters in the Young Jack Sparrow series, like when they first appeared, a short bio about them, and an illustration of each character. All in all, it is a really, really cool book and a great way to send off the Young Jack Sparrow series. So how this will work is essentially like the other episodes covering the previous books. I'll cover the tale of Billy Turner the same way, and then we'll briefly go through the 5 short stories as they are fun, but there's not much to them besides just being able to spend more time with the characters. And I should also mention we're going to deep dive into an interesting theory about the identity of Will Turner's mother as well once we finish the main story. I'll try to leave timestamps or chapters for the different sections so it's easier to find what you want to listen to. But anyway, without further ado, let's learn the backstory of Bootstrap Bill in The Tale of Billy Turner. So the book begins on the Isle of Man, which if you don't know is an island in the Irish Sea, which is between Ireland and the United Kingdom. And this is where we meet young Billy Turner. Let's go right into the book here. So the book begins and says, "The sea was empty. This was the only conclusion that could be drawn by the people of the Isle of Man during one unusually hot, dry September during the first half of the 18th century. It had been almost a full year since they'd harvested a single adult cod or pollock, though the waters around the island were usually teeming with both. Most people on the island chose not to talk about the famine. The silence was brought about in part due to the superstitious belief that speaking of the tragedy would invite more disaster. But it also was an attempt to keep the dire situation off people's minds. It would seem that no one wanted to suffer the fate of Mr. McGowan. The old man, driven mad by poverty and hunger, had sailed his failing boat into a warm July sunset and never returned. Truth be told, however, some of the island's inhabitants envied Mr. McGowan. To be free of the isle would be a gift, even if sailing a rickety boat off into the vast reaches of forever was the only way to escape. After all, evidence of the famine was everywhere, not just in the sea. It had transformed the island into a bleak place. Without fish, there was nothing to sell or trade. And without that, money was in short supply. Paint peeled from walls. Iron fences began to rust and decay. Nets frayed, sails deteriorated, and the decks of boats began to buckle. If the sea suddenly began to teem with life again, the people of the isle would have no means to harvest it. Billy Turner considered all of this as he sat at the docks. He surveyed the port behind him. Shuttered windows and boarded-up doors stared back. He shook his head and ran his hands through his thick brown hair. His handsome face had grown gaunt over the past few months, and his well-toned arms were now thin and almost frail. The bright sparkle that had been evident in his gray-blue eyes when he arrived there had been extinguished, leaving in its place 2 despairing, brooding orbs. A bark sounded from the right end of the dock, and some of Billy's old joy returned for a moment. "Crumbs!" he called out. A ratty mutt bounded up the dock toward Billy. He was gray and white, and about the length of a retriever. Crumbs jumped up on Billy and began happily licking his face. Finally, the dog sat, and Billy patted its side. Half of Billy's joy left him again as he felt Crumbs' ribs, tight against Crumbs' skin. Crumbs was half the weight he should have been, and yet he still seemed happy to see Billy. "Ah, Crumbs," Billy said, smiling. "I can always count on you to pick me up." The dog barked and jumped off Billy. Crumbs seemed to have a wealth of energy, despite his bony frame. He began to run in circles around Billy, who rose to his feet and patted the dog on his head. Using his tattered shirt sleeve, Billy wiped the sweat from his own forehead as Crumbs began to pant. "You want some water then, boy? Ah, well, you come to the right place. We've got plenty of water here in the Isle of Man. Not much else, though." He walked over to a freshwater spigot behind the dock and pumped some water out. Crumbs lapped at the spout, then nuzzled it, soaking his face. He shook the water from his head, and Billy took a drink for himself. "Hey, ye!" a man shouted. Whirling, Billy saw a nearly toothless man moving toward him. When he was closer, Billy noted his foul breath reeked like rotten fish. "What makes you think we want your filthy dogs slurping from the same spigot we clean our own fair skin in?" Billy recognized the man as a member of the Sea Star's crew. The Star was a merchant ship having the Isle of Man as a port of call. Its crew had a particularly nasty reputation on the island. Most people kept their distance. "He was thirsty and," Billy began. "Ah, no excuses from you. The filthy mutt's half dead, and yet there he goes, drinking our clean water, probably contaminating it with whatever disease it has in there." "It's called hunger, sir," Billy said, steeling himself for a fight. "And I hardly think that he would contaminate that there spout any more than say, well, you and your rotten mouth." The man's face turned a bright red, and he raised a hand toward Billy. Crumbs immediately jumped in front of his master. He growled and bared his teeth at the threatening man. Billy was impressed that the dog could still look so intimidating, even in his weakened state. The man must have been equally impressed as he dropped his fist. "Don't you ever let me see you here again with that dirty mutt," the man said, pointing his finger directly at Billy's face. Billy narrowed his eyes with a steady resolve. The man was a full head taller than Billy, and twice as wide, but Billy did not back down. The man's nostrils flared before he moved to squat down and wash his face. "Come on, Crumbs, let's go," Billy said. As Crumbs hurried off ahead of him, Billy heard the man mumble something. He turned his attention to the man again. "What was that?" Billy asked. The man ignored him. "Thought not," Billy said. Leaving the man, he followed Crumbs up a small hill offshore. It was only a few hundred meters to home. Billy lived with his mother's sister and her husband in a shack that was set up upon a ridge. His Aunt Erin, who had never cared for dogs, was a good woman, but she made Crumbs sleep outside. She was standing at the door as Billy and Crumbs arrived. Crumbs barked and then ran around the back, where Billy had built him a doghouse. "Oh, dear boy, you look scorched," Aunt Erin said, opening the door and welcoming Billy in. She was a slight woman, with tousled gray hair. The softness of her thick, familiar brogue comforted Billy. She placed a hand on his shoulder and sat him down at the simple, worn table in the middle of the sparsely furnished room. The smell of the sea occasionally wafted in, mixing with the weak scent of a stew his aunt had set on the hearth. "The heat of this must be killing you. Had I known it would have been so hot, I never would have set the hearth aflame today." Aunt Erin made her way over to the large pot. She reached up without looking, pulled down a bowl, and ladled out a cup. "I'm so sorry that's all I can offer you, but—" Her voice broke off, and Billy could tell by her quivering mouth that she was holding back tears. Billy looked up at her as she placed the bowl down before him. "It's okay, really. This looks wonderful. It truly does," Billy said gently, staring at a bowl of broth that was so clear it could have been water. It was almost laughable to call it a stew. A quarter-inch slice of carrot and a sliver of celery floated around in it. Then Billy noticed that it wasn't celery at all, but a boiled maggot that must have fallen into the kettle. Aunt Erin hovered above him. "Well then, go ahead and eat it," she said. "I will, I surely will, just waiting for it to cool down a bit," Billy said, wiping his forehead for dramatic effect before carefully pushing the bowl away. Just then, Crumbs barked loudly, and the rear door swung open. A small fish flew through the doorway into the room. It landed with a thud on the floor and flopped around, its gills laboring in the absence of the water it needed to breathe. Moments later, a short, slender man with a sheared head and a terrible sunburn entered the room. "Was that the only one today, Uncle Seamus?" Billy asked the man, motioning to the fish, which was still flopping around. "Only one this week," Uncle Seamus replied. He unlaced his boots and set them beside the door. An unbearable stink filled the small room, and Billy tried to hide his disgust. "So you still can't find your skiff, then?" Uncle Seamus asked, changing the subject. He hovered over Billy and eyed his broth. "No, sir," Billy replied. "I spent the whole of the day down at the dock searching, but it was no use." Uncle Seamus shook his head. He leaned over Billy, then dipped into his broth and removed the maggot, popping it into his mouth. "I tell you, there might not be any fish here on the isle, but you can't complain about the hearty taste of our celery," he said. Billy winced, but did not correct his uncle's statement. "If I can't find the skiff by week's end, I'll start to build a new one," he said instead, feeling a little queasy and eager to put an end to the conversation. "You should have known better," Uncle Seamus said, reprimanding him. "You should have brought it back to the house. Then you'd never have to figure anything out. I'm surprised at you, Billy. There's pirates everywhere these days. They'll steal anything from you, the clothes off your back, the food you're eating, for heaven's sake. They'll even steal a worthless little skiff." Billy was a little hurt by his uncle's calling the skiff worthless. Perhaps it was just a skiff, but it was the only boat Billy had, and probably would ever have. He liked to imagine that it was something grander than it really was. He'd even named the little boat, painting the word anemone along her side. Uncle Seamus sat down at the table and pulled Billy's broth close to him, digging in. The room filled with an uncomfortable silence, and Billy sensed there was something wrong. "So you've told him?" Uncle Seamus asked Aunt Erin without looking up from the bowl. Aunt Erin grimaced and shook her head. "Told me what?" Billy asked. Uncle Seamus continued to eat while Aunt Erin began nervously tidying the small room. Billy calmly folded his hands on the table and straightened his back. "I'm no longer a child. I have a right to know the matters of this household," Billy said. Uncle Seamus pushed his empty bowl away. He looked steadily into Billy's face. "Billy, you want to know the matters of this household? Fine, then, I'll tell you," Uncle Seamus said with a steely resolve. "We've hardly a speck of food here. I've been catching 3 or 4 fish a month. The house here is falling apart. Just last week the floorboards on the back porch snapped, and I've not even 1/10 of a pound sterling to replace them. The sea is devoid of anything but driftwood and salt water. The town, nay, the entire island is falling apart at her seams. You've been like a son to us, William," he added, "and what I'm trying to say is—" Billy closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger. "I know what you're trying to say," Billy said. "I wish there was another way," Uncle Seamus said. "There is," Billy replied, standing up from his place at the table. "You can let me help you more. We can get back on our feet. We'll move inland and start a farm. The farmers use seaweed for fertilizer, Billy. There's no seaweed left in the ocean. They are suffering just as greatly. No, William, the only way out of this situation is to get off the bloody island. And of the 3 of us, you're the best suited for that task." Billy cringed. That was what he had feared Uncle Seamus meant. "Look at us, Billy. We're not so young. There's a lot of hope in you. So much opportunity." Billy breathed heavily, weighed down by the gravity of the situation. Uncle Seamus stepped up from the table and moved to the back of the shack. He kneeled down and lifted up one of the floorboards. There was a bundle of papers hidden beneath the loose board. He sorted through them and handed one to Billy. "What's this?" Billy asked as Uncle Seamus placed the paper in his hand. "It's your way out. This is a ticket I purchased down at the docks. A ticket to the New World. I was well on my way to purchasing 2 more when the sea failed us. It will get you as far as North Carolina on the coast of America. What you do when you arrive there is your concern. All I ask is this. If you manage to make it, then send for us. The ship leaves today, lad. I wish your aunt here would have been able to bring herself to tell you sooner, to give us more time to say goodbye." Billy looked at the piece of paper in his hand. He was overcome with so many emotions that he really didn't know how to respond. He decided to not say anything at all. Simply nodding his head, Billy went to pack the few things he owned and left the shack. He looked back only once, to see his aunt sobbing on her husband's shoulder and Crumbs baying mournfully on the worn-out porch. Then Billy set his eyes on the horizon and headed toward the dilapidated docks. Alright, so that first chapter introduces us to a lot of what is going on in Billy's life. The Isle of Man is experiencing a bad famine, and there are barely any fish surrounding the island. We also meet Billy's family, which is his Aunt Erin, his Uncle Seamus, and his dog Crumbs. Seamus has given Billy a ticket to the New World so he can start a new life. So Billy reluctantly goes down to the docks and runs into Reverend Chambers, who is a friend of Aunt Erin and Uncle Seamus. Billy finds out that even Reverend Chambers knew about him getting shipped off to America, and he asks the Reverend what ship he'll be sailing on. Reverend Chambers is also pretty drunk currently, but he tells Billy he'll be sailing on the Sea Star. Billy starts to get nervous at this, as he ran into a crew member from the Sea Star earlier, and everyone aboard the ship is fighting or acting terribly. And before Billy boards the ship, Reverend Chambers asks him to send him some tobacco from America. And after that, Billy runs into the crew member he met earlier. We find out this man's name is Mr. Hawk, as the captain tells him to back off. The captain tells Billy to run off as well, but he shows him the ticket his uncle gave him. The captain tells him that unfortunately it is a fake ticket that was part of a scam a few months back. Billy asks him then if there was a way he can stay aboard, and right after this, 2 men who were fighting up in the crow's nest fall out and fall all the way down to the deck. The captain then notices that he is now short 2 men, and he asks Billy if he can fill the position of both. After Billy agrees, the captain introduces himself as Captain David Donovan. So the next day, Billy is woken up from the sound of the ship's bell ringing, and he and the rest of the crew make their way onto the main deck. Captain Donovan then begins to tell the crew to get to work, and Billy is left standing there not knowing what to do. So the captain gets angry at Billy not doing anything, but Billy tells him that he hasn't been told what his role is. Captain Donovan then tells Billy that he is executive assistant to Mr. Hawk, who is the cook. So he tries to find the kitchen, and he eventually finds it and tells Mr. Hawk that he is supposed to assist him. Mr. Hawk says that he should kill Billy for how he spoke to him back on the Isle of Man, but it was also pretty brave. So the two of them begin to warm up to each other as the weeks begin to go by, and Mr. Hawk becomes Billy's chief defender. Once they have become more friendly, Mr. Hawk teaches Billy some sea shanties and how they have hidden meetings that are apparently written down in the Pirata Codex. And Mr. Hawk shrugs these off as old wives' tales, but he still warns Billy against singing them in public. The Sea Star's course is to head to North Carolina, with a stop in Bermuda along the way. So the morning before they arrive in Bermuda, Billy notices that there are thousands of dead fish floating on the surface of the water, and very quickly he notices a large sea creature sinking beneath the waves nearby. But before Billy can think about what it was, the crew spots Bermuda in the distance. As they get ready to dock, Billy notices a squadron of Royal Navy soldiers on the dock. Billy goes over to Mr. Hawk and asks him how long they'll be in Bermuda, but Mr. Hawk doesn't reply. Billy asks him if everything's alright, and Mr. Hawk assures him everything is fine. After this, Captain Donovan comes up from behind them and asks what is going on. So let's go back into the book here. So Captain Donovan says, "Men, Mr. Hawk in particular," he said, "can you please tell me what's going on here?" Mr. Hawk shook his head rapidly. I don't know, sir." "Well, somebody had better. How are we to continue under these circumstances?" the captain asked. "We do have the papers from Ipswich," Mr. Hawk replied. "Do you honestly believe those to be usable?" "They've worked before," Mr. Hawk said. Billy didn't quite know what was going on, but he was growing uneasy with the shady banter, and as he looked toward the dock to the Navy officers and soldiers below to reassure himself, he became even more concerned. The men had severe, harsh looks on their faces. As the Sea Star pulled into dock, one of the higher-ranking officers stepped forward. "Permission to dock, sir," Captain Donovan said. The officer stared back in stony silence. "Where is Admiral Lawson?" the captain forged on. The officer broke his silence. "Admiral Lawson has been hanged. He was found to have been allowing use of this port by pirates in exchange for compensation from said pirate fiends. In the eyes of the Crown, this makes him a pirate himself. But then, perhaps you know all that already. Perhaps he was helping your own pirate ship run goods as well." The captain stood firm. "Sir, I assure you we are not a pirate ship. I run a vessel of good men here," he said. Behind him a fight had broken out, and a sailor was swearing loudly while holding his broken nose. The captain cleared his throat and turned his attention back to the docks. "We request dockage." "Whether you were free to dock was never a question," the officer said ominously. "What will happen to you after you do dock is the true matter at hand." After disembarking, the crew of the Sea Star lined up on the dock. For every sailor, there was a soldier standing before him with a gun pointed at his face. Billy stared down the barrel before him. His knees shook and his eyes crossed, the gun being so close to his face. He had been separated from the captain and Mr. Hawk, who were now at the opposite end of the line. Close behind them was the admiral who had apparently replaced Lawson. Billy tried to lean over to see if the officer was questioning the captain, but he accidentally butted his eye against the gun barrel before him and started back. "Captain," he heard the officer begin, "you and your men are docking in a port known to be frequented by pirates, searching for an officer who was recently executed for piracy. Prove your innocence or suffer his fate." The captain spoke up. "Men, produce your papers." Billy heard shuffling and shifting and crumbling all around him. What papers were they looking for? His chest tightened. He was certain that he didn't have the papers that were being requested. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the only paper he had, the counterfeit ticket that Uncle Seamus had given him. As each sailor produced his papers, the gun before him was dropped. "See, officer, we're a law-abiding ship," the captain said. "Papers!" a soldier shouted into Billy's face. Billy's ticket quivered in his hand as he raised it up to the soldier, who tore it from his hand, examined it, and then called the admiral over. The two mumbled something, and then the soldier grabbed Billy by the arm and threw him to the ground. Billy landed face down in the dirt as the admiral stormed over. "Pirate!" the admiral said accusingly. "No, sir, there's a mistake. I'm not a—" "Silence!" the admiral shouted. Billy tried to stand up, but the big booted foot of a soldier came crashing down upon his head, forcing his face back into the dirt. The admiral stormed back over to the captain, waving the counterfeit ticket in his face. "So, not pirates, then," the admiral barked. "As you most likely know already, this is a fraudulent document printed by pirates. What say you?" "Which man of mine produced this vile thing?" the captain asked angrily. "The skinny one, down at the other end," Mr. Hawk replied, before any of the Navy men could. Billy's heart raced. What was Mr. Hawk doing? "Boy!" Captain Donovan shouted. He stormed over to Billy. "Who are you? What are you doing aboard my ship?" Billy's mood went quickly from shocked and confused to furious. "Come now, Captain, you know exactly who I am. You're the one who took me aboard," Billy replied. "Quite the contrary. I have never before seen you in my life. A stowaway you are, and a pirate. The likes of you make my blood boil." Billy turned to the Admiral to plead his case. "He's lying. I showed him this ticket and he told me it was counterfeit. He was going to refuse me passage, but two of his men killed each other, and he needed me aboard. Hawk, tell him," Billy shouted, his face growing redder. But Hawk just stared at Billy with a quizzical expression. "How do you know my name?" he asked Billy. "Must have been skulking around our cabins without our knowing, listening in on our conversations," the captain said disgustedly. "What are you on about?" Billy shouted. The captain didn't answer. "Take this man away and do what you will with him. Men of his ilk, these pirates, turn my stomach," he said to the Admiral's men. The soldiers grabbed Billy by the arms and lifted him up. One bound his hands and feet in chains, while a half-dozen others aimed their guns at him. "Are we free to go, then?" the captain said. The Admiral considered the question. "Are you certain you have no other stowaways aboard?" he asked. "As certain as one can be," Captain Donovan answered, flashing a brilliant smile. "Then yes, you are free to go about your business," the Admiral said. "What will become of the pirate?" Mr. Hawk asked. "He'll be taken to Port Royal, where he'll be hanged and displayed as an example of what fate lies in store for his kind." Billy glared at Hawk. If there was any regret about Billy's demise in the cook's face, Billy couldn't see it. The captain held Billy by the chin and spat into his face. As the spittle dripped down his cheek, Billy's anger grew so severe that he thought he'd break through his bonds and kill the man. But his hands were bound in iron, and no anger, no matter how strong, could have broken those chains. The Admiral, who had not taken his eyes off Billy the whole time, leaned in once more. "Welcome to Bermuda, pirate," he said. "Enjoy it while you can. In a week's time, you'll not be able to enjoy anything at all. In a week's time, you'll be dead." So obviously something dubious is going on here with this crew, but Billy has now been wrongfully labeled as a pirate and sentenced to hang in Port Royal in a week's time. So Billy is thrown into a cell in Bermuda, and he is able to hear the sounds of the Sea Star's crew enjoying their time in the town from outside. Billy is angry at himself for trusting them and believing them to be friends, but he is given little time to think about that as the Admiral orders Billy to be transferred from the holding cell to the brig of the ship that will take him to Port Royal. As he is marched to the ship, he sees Mr. Hawk one last time, who seems indifferent to Billy being captured. After this, Billy is brought aboard the ship and thrown into the brig, which he finds even more disgusting than the holding cell he was in. There are even rats in the cell, and one of them bites down onto Billy's boot. So Billy then flings the rat into the face of the Admiral, and the Admiral hits Billy with the butt of his gun, and Billy goes unconscious. When Billy wakes up later, he hears hushed voices from outside his cell, and he realizes they are young voices. One of them sounds like it belongs to a girl, and Billy tries to listen in on what they are saying. So let's go back into the book and see who it is. So the voice says, "You know, I really don't feel quite right about this," the voice said. "It definitely belonged to a girl." Billy closed his eyes and pretended to be knocked out. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he certainly did not want to get mixed up with girls who were not feeling right about things aboard Navy ships. What was a girl even doing on a Navy ship in the first place? Billy had landed himself in enough trouble since leaving the Isle of Man. This newest development could only get him in deeper. Women on ships were bad luck. "You don't feel right, mon cher?" a boy's voice said. "You know, you're really going to have to change that outlook. We've joined the crew of a pirate ship. We're going to have to do some things that might not seem so right." "Pirates!" Billy's eyes flew open. He had been hanged on the spot if the Navy caught pirates lurking around his cell. Apparently, unaware of or concerned by his presence, the boy and the girl continued their conversation. "I understand that now and then we might have to bend the rules a bit, but stealing from the Navy? Don't you think it's a wee bit extreme?" the girl asked. "Oh, come now. As Jack would say, we're not really stealing," the boy replied. "Oh, don't you bring Jack Sparrow into this. That boy is a few sails short of a ship, if you know what I mean." Billy didn't like where this conversation was going. "Besides," the girl continued, "we have sneaked onto a vessel belonging to the Crown. We are planning to break into a cabin on that very vessel, and once we break into that cabin, we are going to find something that doesn't belong to us and take it. Now you tell me, how is that not stealing?" Billy was convinced, and so it seemed was the girl's partner. "Okay," the boy said, sighing. "It's stealing. But if we don't, your mamma will be quite, how would you say, Mad. And we all know what she's like when she's angry. Billy could practically hear the girl shiver. What was going on? Two pirates, no older than teenagers, with some sort of moral code and a mother who would be angry if they didn't steal something? Billy had never heard anything like this before. Let's try over here, the boy said. The figures came even closer to Billy's cell. He had to do something. He couldn't risk being caught with pirates. It would wipe away any slim chance he had of surviving this situation. A foot tiptoed in front of his cell. Billy jammed his elbow down on the tail of one of the rats that was nearest to him. The rat screeched. The girl screamed. Billy lifted up his head and took a first look at the pair. In the dim light, he could tell the girl was pretty but a bit worn, with long, wavy auburn hair. The boy was a full head shorter than she was. His reddish-brown hair was curly, and his full face was freckled. "Hello," Billy said. "You fiend! Who are you?" the girl asked. "I don't think I'm the fiend here. You are, after all, the ones looking for something to steal," he pointed out. "Arabella," the boy said, grabbing the girl's arm. "The crew must have heard you scream. We need to get out of here, quick." Billy held the girl's gaze. He was done for. The Navy would find these pirates and think they were trying to help him escape. Then they'd do away with all three of them at once. There was only one action to take. "Please, take me with you," Billy begged. "Help me escape." The girl appeared to be taken aback. "And why should we do that, you criminal?" "Again, I'm not the one looking to rob the Navy." "What was your crime, then?" Arabella asked. "I'm accused of being a pirate, but I'm not," Billy said. Then he remembered who it was that he was speaking to. "Not that there's anything wrong with being a pirate. Look, they are planning to hang me in Port Royal, but I've done nothing wrong." "That does sound like the Navy," the boy said. "Why should we believe you?" Arabella asked. "If you don't, and I am telling the truth, then an innocent man will hang in Port Royal, and you'll have let it happen," Billy answered. "That's very unfair to position it that way," Arabella said. "Arabella, if we do release him and he is telling the truth, we'll have an ally when it comes time to fight our way through the Navy crew." Arabella gave Billy a curious look. For a moment it seemed she might acquiesce, but then she shook her head. "No, let's go, John," Arabella said. "We need to find the room where the criminal records are kept, and so far all we've found is a ship's sewage outlet." "Is that what smells so bad down here?" John asked. "If it weren't Mum's first mate who had been taken prisoner by the Navy, you know I'd not even be down here. I'm not freeing criminals on top of it all," Arabella said. "I know where the records are kept," Billy lied, thinking quickly. That seemed to interest Arabella. John looked equally interested. Raising an eyebrow, Arabella nodded to John, who took a ring of keys out of his pocket. The head of each was sculpted to look like a different skull. "I knew I wasn't wasting my doubloons when I picked up these skeleton keys in New Orleans," he said. John unlocked the cell and freed Billy of his bonds, helping him to his feet. He wiped his hands on his pants to get the sludge off. "I'm Billy. Billy Turner." "I'm Arabella Smith," the girl said, "and this is John Magliore. We sail under Captain Laura Smith aboard the Fleur de Mort. And for the record, I still don't trust you." "I haven't yet given you reason to," Billy said. "Let's fix that," Arabella said. Billy nodded. A good way to start would be to find the records room. He just wished he knew where it was. Okay, so Billy has now met Arabella and John, and we also see that John has a set of skeleton keys that he picked up back in New Orleans, which is how he opens Billy's cell. And as he promised, Billy begins to lead them to the records room, which he is trying to find as well since he doesn't know where it is. So the three of them make their way through the ship, and Arabella eventually stops and asks Billy if he is leading them to the Admiral to get caught. Billy asks her why he would do that, since the Navy is after him as well. Arabella explains that he could turn them both in and negotiate for freedom on his behalf, and Billy is shocked since he hadn't thought of that. He tells her that he is helping them find their papers since they freed him from his cell. And Arabella gets annoyed at Billy believing himself to be a man of honor when he has no honor to begin with. So she storms off, and John goes over to Billy and tells him that Arabella has trust issues, but he believes Billy will help them. Anyway, Billy leads them to a door and hopes that this is the document room Arabella and John are looking for. John uses his skeleton keys to open the door, and they realize that it is the chicken coop. Billy closes the door before the noise can alert anyone, and Arabella gets even more suspicious of Billy, thinking that he was trying to cause a ruckus so they could be caught. Billy tries to defend himself by lying that he was taken into the document room when he was brought on board, but he doesn't remember where it is because he was tired and hungry. Arabella is ready to send Billy back to the brig, but John convinces her to give him another chance. But Arabella becomes increasingly frustrated after they go from room to room, unsuccessful in finding the document room. She tells him that this time it is his last chance before they bring him back to the brig. Billy tells her that it is the room down the hall with torches on each side. Arabella asks him if he is sure it is that room, and Billy nods. So John begins to use his skeleton keys to open the door. So let's go back into the book and see what happens next. Alright, so in the book it says, he slipped in a key that looked almost right for the hole. He turned it and the lock clicked, but his expression showed confusion rather than satisfaction. What's the matter, Jean? Arabella whispered. La porte, the door, it clicked, Jean answered. I know it did, we're standing right here, Arabella said. No, I mean, it clicked locked, John said. Arabella hurried over and took the keys from John's hand. She searched for the one he'd used and held it up to the torches. Is this the key you locked the door with? Arabella asked. Oui, John answered, as Arabella tried to quickly stick it in the keyhole. But what are you doing? I just want to get what we're here for and get off this ship. So far we've accumulated a fugitive and broken into 5 Navy rooms, 6 if you include the brig. But the fact that it was open, Billy began, reaching out to stop her, it means there is probably... Before he could finish, Arabella flung the door open. It was the records room, all right, filled to the ceiling with papers, books, and ledgers. And there was something else in there, too. Something they did not expect to find. The Admiral. Oh, my stars, Arabella said, stunned, as the Admiral drew his sword and ran at the 3 of them. Pirates, he yelled. Come to save one of your own? Now you all perish by the sword of justice. The 3 did not need any further encouragement. They took off. As the Admiral ran after them, he violently jerked the clapper of every bell he passed on deck, signaling his men to wake up and come to arms. And in case that wasn't loud enough, he also yelled, a lot. Navy sailors darted from their rooms, most of them in disordered uniforms, some half-dressed, but all of them armed. I don't know who I'm more terrified of, John said to Arabella, the Navy or your mother. Once she finds out we don't have the records in hand and we've upset the Navy, she'll have us walk the floor to the Mort's plank. Mum, Arabella repeated fearfully. She ran to the broadside of the ship and called out into the empty night. Mum, come aboard and bring all the arms you can carry. Billy couldn't believe it. Just when he thought that his experiences since leaving the Isle of Man couldn't get any stranger, he found himself aboard a Navy ship, watching a girl, a pirate girl no less, call out into the emptiness for her mother. There were no ships, no lights, no anything, for as far as the eye could see. There weren't even the sounds you might expect to hear if another ship were nearby. No bells, no crew scurrying around, no sails flapping. They were alone on this ocean. So who did this insane girl think she was talking to? What Billy saw next caused him to believe that perhaps it wasn't the girl who was crazy, but rather himself. As he stared at the dark night that surrounded Arabella, 2 pirates, a boy who looked Mayan and a tall, imposing woman, dived out of thin air and landed on the deck with 2 heroic thuds. Those sounds were followed close behind by another thud. This one was much quieter. Billy realized that something small and furry had followed them from wherever they came from. Could it be a cat? It looked more like a huge, miserable rat. The woman who had emerged from thin air looked very much like Arabella. Billy guessed that she was in fact Arabella's mother, and a tough cookie at that. She held a sword in each hand and wore 2 more on her hips. The boy, who was about John's height and age, was wielding what appeared to be an obsidian knife. The woman tossed the swords in her hands to Arabella and John, who caught them with ease. The thing, which did in fact seem to be a cat, ran up to Billy and hissed. No, Constance, John called out to the cat. He's on our side. So says ye, Arabella shouted just as the pursuing Navy men came upon them. The sound of steel against steel filled the night as swords clanked all around. An all-out battle had broken out between the Fleur's small group of pirates and the Navy, and the pirates were doing an amazingly good job of holding their own. They were outnumbered at least 20 to 1, but they seemed to fight much more effectively than the Navy, using unusual tactics to overcome their opponents. John lowered a series of ballasts that were hanging in the rigging onto a group of sailors, taking 5 of them out at once. The boy with the obsidian knife severed one of the rat lines, netting a good 20 men in one fell swoop. He quickly tied the line into knots, trapping the sailors inside. Even the cat, Constance, seemed to be making the most of her opportunities. She weaved in and out among the sailors' legs, tripping them up and allowing John, Arabella, and the others to profit by her work. Billy was not sure exactly what he should do. If he fought with the pirates and they lost, he would be done for by the Navy. If he fought with the Navy, he'd be done for by the pirates. If he took no action at all, he'd most likely be executed in Port Royal. He thought about it for a moment, and then caught a glimpse of the Admiral, battling with Arabella's mother, Laura Smith. Both of them looked severe and violent, but there was a nastiness, maybe even an evilness, in the Admiral's eyes. He seemed to want to beat the pirates for the sake of killing them and getting the credit. Laura, on the other hand, looked as if she was battling for her life. She looked as though she really believed in something. Billy had no idea what that something was, but he was beginning to believe that perhaps pirate and honest sailor, like good and bad, were not as easy to distinguish as he had been taught. At that moment, he decided to do something he would never have considered doing even a month prior. Billy Turner, a fisherman from the Isle of Man, decided to become a pirate. And just as he made that momentous decision, Billy realized the battle had taken everyone to the front end of the ship. The records room was on the aft end. Every sailor on the ship was engaged in the battle with the pirates, which meant the records room was left unguarded. He sneaked down the corridor they had recently traversed and located the room. The door was still unlocked. It swayed open and closed as the boat rocked back and forth in the waves with the motion of the battle. He grabbed a torch from alongside the room and entered. There were papers everywhere, and Billy held the torch as close as possible, knowing that if he weren't careful, he would set the whole room aflame. He didn't know where to begin, but soon realized that the papers were filed by ship name. Arabella had said her mother's vessel was called the Fleur de Mort. Billy grabbed the scroll that was marked with the name of Laura's ship and stashed it into his pocket. He started to run out of the records room, but a name written on a scroll lying open on the table caught his eye. Jack Sparrow. Hadn't Arabella just been talking about him? The paper said something about Sparrows being wanted for a list of numerous crimes. One was tricking a 6-year-old boy into masquerading as an officer of the crown. Billy furrowed his brow. What type of man was this Jack Sparrow anyway? Billy moved the scroll. Beneath it, he found something else that interested him. His own arrest report and criminal record. He smiled, rolled up both records, and took them with him. The sound of battle still raged at the other end of the ship. Billy had just emerged from the records room when suddenly the entire ship began to list to one side. There was no way that anything happening in the battle could have caused the boat to sway so much. The ship was practically on its side. Billy clung to the railing, doing his best to keep himself aboard. Just before it seemed as though the ship would tip completely over, it began to straighten himself out. But as soon as it was right side up, the ship continued to list and began to dip dramatically toward the other side. Screams were coming now from the opposite end of the ship. Billy could hear splashing, and he knew that some who were aboard must have been thrown off. He hoped that Arabella and John were not among them. He needed to deliver the stolen record to them. It was the only way he could repay them for risking their own lives by setting him free. As suddenly as it had tipped, the ship began to straighten out again. Billy was prepared for yet another roll, but this time the ship just swayed back and forth. Looking over the railing, Billy saw by the pale moonlight a vast, slithering shape moving across the water. Its long, wide body glided just below the surface of the sea. It was like a whale, but 10 times as long. Confused, not to mention a bit worried, Billy rushed back to the fore end of the ship. It was still rocking to and fro significantly. Billy noticed that either most of the Navy sailors were too stunned to continue fighting, or they had already been beaten by Laura and her crew. "Come on!" Laura shouted, jumping off the deck into the darkness and disappearing back to wherever she had come from. The boy with the obsidian blade was right behind her. Then John, who held the disgusting cat tightly in his arms, followed. With a leap off the ship, each of them was gone. "Arabella, now!" Laura's voice rang out in the pitch-black night. Arabella stood on the railing, looking out hesitantly. Billy called out to her. Their eyes met, and he saw that although she still looked at him skeptically, she seemed a bit more sympathetic now. She lifted her head and jumped into the night to join the rest of the crew. "Avast! Halt there!" a voice called out. It was the Admiral, and Billy immediately knew he was speaking to him. He gasped as the Admiral drew his sword and began to run toward him. Billy leaped up on the railing of the ship. The Admiral swiped at Billy with his sword, but Billy nimbly jumped up at every swipe, avoiding his blade by mere inches. "Billy!" a voice suddenly called out from behind him. It was Arabella. "Jump!" she cried. "Jump now!" Billy looked behind him. There was nothing but dark, open sea and a coal-black night sky. He turned, and there was a madman wielding his sword. Billy did the only thing he could. He turned around again, and against all logic or reasoning, jumped. So Billy now finds himself on the deck of the Fleur de Mort. Everyone on board is recovering from the battle on the Navy ship, and Billy realizes that the ship is not following them. He then realizes that the Fleur de Mort is only visible to those on board. The crew also begins to wonder what the creature in the water was that had rocked the ship. Arabella thinks it could have been the Kraken, but Laura quickly shuts that idea down. If it was the Kraken, then the ship would have been torn to pieces. After a quick moment to rest, Laura walks over to Billy and asks why he is here. So let's go back into the book and see what happens here. "What's this? And what is it doing aboard my ship?" Laura asked. Her expression was severe. It was clear she meant business, and Billy felt a tremor of fear run through him. He looked at Arabella, who lowered her eyes. Laura sighed. Please tell me you didn't. Oh, you're such a fool. You can't take every handsome man with soulful eyes aboard. It's not like that, Mother, Arabella said simply. Oh, then, do tell what it is like exactly, Laura responded, sneering again. He was going to help us, John said, stepping in to defend Arabella. Keep quiet, Laura said. Yes, ma'am, John snapped back to attention to quickly shut up. First of all, going to help us does not mean that he actually has. In fact, he is almost certainly a liability. Do you think the Navy hasn't had enough reason to come searching for us? Do you think they needed one more active treason to pin upon us? Further, how is it that you can be so sure that he is not a Navy agent himself? You might have just brought the enemy aboard. Children, 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 you've all so much to learn about pirating, Laura paused, sighing condescendingly, and the crew hung their heads. She walked over to Billy again and patted his cheek lightly. Besides, he might be pretty, but he does not look very intelligent. Billy scowled. He was usually very even-tempered, but he had never been one to take an insult without responding. Not intelligent, ma'am, Billy snapped. A few crew members inhaled sharply. John gestured to indicate that Billy should not antagonize Laura, but it was too late. Her face was red with rage, and she put her hand on the hilt of her sword at her hip. Arabella gasped. Billy grabbed for something at his hip as well, and then the captain and Billy both drew. Laura stood with her sword lifted high over her head, but Billy hadn't drawn a sword. He had pulled out an entirely different sort of weapon. It was the scroll that he had taken from the naval ship's records room. What's this? Laura asked waringly, lowering her sword. Open it and see for yourself, Billy said, handing Laura the scroll. His hand was shaking with a mix of terror and rage. Laura stowed her sword and took the item. She unrolled it and examined it closely. Her scowl quickly reformed into a broad smile. She cocked her head to one side and threw open her arms. Come here, mate, Laura said. Billy was taken aback by Laura's sudden shift in mood, but the expressions on the faces of the crew seemed to suggest that he should just play along as she threw her arms around him and hugged him tightly. Welcome to the crew of the Fleur de Mort. I always knew you could be trusted. It was just the judgment of this bratty crew that made me second-guess my faith in you. I'm Captain Laura Smith. I believe you've already met my beautiful, if dim, daughter, Arabella, and her Creole companion, John. That fellow with the shiny black knife over there is Tuman, and the nasty little feline that John is holding is called Constance. John insists that she's his sister, under some sort of mystical spell, but none of us really knows for sure. We can't believe that anyone who was once a human could be quite that nasty. Constance hissed and jumped from John's arms, retreating to a dark corner of the deck. And you are? Laura asked, calmer now, though her voice still held a hint of condescension. Billy, ma'am. Billy Turner. Mum, what does the record say? Where are they holding Mr. Reese? Arabella asked, jumping between them. She placed her hand on her mother's arm and peered over her shoulder at the scroll. Port Royal, of course. We should have known. They intend to execute him along with a group of 5 other pirates in a week's time. In fact, Billy Turner, it looks as though you were meant to be the final member of this morbid and offensive act, Laura said. Billy felt a lump form in his throat. It seemed so strange that pirates, whom he had always thought as the scourges of the seas, should be his salvation. An hour earlier, as a prisoner aboard the Navy vessel, he had had almost no hope of surviving the month, and now he was a free man, surrounded by a group who seemed more than capable of protecting him. Laura gave Billy one last pat on the shoulder, then began to walk toward the ship's wheel, barking orders to the crew. Tuman, set our course for Port Royal. John, ready the ship and keep that rat-cat thing of yours away from me. We've not much time. The trip to Port Royal can take as long as a week. We'll need to catch some good wind if we're to make it there before Mr. Reese's execution. Laura looked at her daughter and smiled weakly. Arabella, Billy Turner, make yourselves useful, Laura said. What would you like us to do, Mum? Arabella asked. You're a big girl. Figure it out, Laura said, waving her hand airily as she stomped away. Look, I'm sorry for the way I treated you, Arabella said to Billy when they were alone. No, don't be. I understand. I would have acted the same way. I was a prisoner aboard a government vessel. Truth be told, I'm not sure I would have set me free if I were in your position. So thank you, Billy said. A short but very uncomfortable silence followed. Billy took the opportunity to find out more about the ship. So, would you mind telling me why it was that I couldn't see this huge ship from the Navy vessel? He asked. The Fleur's sails are charmed. Made from special thread or something, Mum says, though I'm not quite sure she even knows how it works. She told me the boat already had the ability to cloak itself when she, acquired it from its previous captain. Anyway, regardless of why or how they work, when the sails are unfurled, the ship and anything on it becomes invisible to anyone who's not on board. Billy couldn't help laughing. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Any more ridiculous than the giant sea beast we all saw tip that large Navy ship? Arabella asked. Billy shrugged. Thought not, Arabella said smugly. It has to work some other way. There has to be some explanation, through science or logic. Mirrors or something, Billy persisted. Billy, I'm sure you've seen some strange things these past few weeks at sea. I wish I could tell you I had all the answers or that things would become less strange over time, but that'd be a lie. Since I've been sailing on the Caribbean, I've seen things I don't think I'll ever be able to explain if I live to be 100. You're going to see more of it, and if you want to survive, if you want to keep yourself sane, take my advice and don't try to ask yourself too many questions about how and why. Just accept that whatever is, is. Billy wasn't entirely comfortable with this way of thinking. It had always been in his nature to try to figure things out. Simply accepting the idea that a ship could turn invisible seemed foolhardy to him. In fact, the more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he became. Instead of dwelling on this, he decided to change the subject. So where exactly are we headed now? I mean, I know we're sailing to Port Royal, but once we get there, he asked. Mum's first mate, Mr. Reese, was taken prisoner by the Royal Navy shortly after we left port in New Orleans. He's about the only person in the world me Mum has any type of allegiance toward, so we're going to break him out, Arabella explained. Rescuing 2 government prisoners in as many weeks? Billy asked. Arabella shrugged and sighed. I'm not happy about it, but once you decide to live the life of a pirate, well, let's just say the freedom of being at sea, well, it comes with a price. So the Fleur de Mort then sets sail for Port Royal to rescue Mr. Reese, and once they get there, Laura is able to get some Navy uniforms for disguises with the help of none other than Joshua Gibbs himself. Of course, we saw Gibbs back in Book 10, Sins of the Father, where we learned that Gibbs has a side hustle of helping pirates in exchange for money and rum. He is still, of course, in the Navy right now, as we know from this series and the beginning of The Curse of the Black Pearl. But anyway, the crew puts on the Navy uniforms from Gibbs and begin to make their way toward the square where the execution is taking place. Once they get there, they spot Mr. Reese going up on the platform, and he smiles when he notices them in the crowd. Laura then tells Arabella and John to guard the way out, while Billy and Tuman make their way to the back of the scaffold. Laura makes her way toward the front of the scaffold, and after Mr. Reese's crimes are listed off, Laura jumps up and cuts Mr. Reese's bonds loose. After the chaos breaks out, Tuman and Billy jump onto the platform and cut the bonds of the other prisoners. Laura and the rest of the crew then begin to run out of the square back towards the floor, and Billy asks Arabella how they will find an invisible ship. Arabella then tells him that her mother has a compass that points to the Fleur de Mort. Once they get to the harbor, everyone boards, but Billy hears a loud scream from behind him. When he turns around, he sees that Arabella has been pinned to the ground by a Navy officer. Billy then holds up his sword, which he barely knows how to use, and charges at the officer. Billy is able to cut the officer's arm, which makes the officer drop his sword, and then he cuts at his legs, which makes him fall off of Arabella. Billy picks Arabella up, and the two of them run toward the Fleur as it sails away from Port Royal. Then back aboard the Fleur, Billy realizes that his leg is bleeding. He hadn't even noticed it during the battle, and Arabella notices it as well, and she goes over to help him. So let's go back into the book and see what happens next. Billy teetered a bit. Arabella rushed over to help him. She took his arm and threw it over his shoulder. You need some support, Billy. Billy grimaced, trying to hide the pain, but this was becoming more difficult, especially as some of the blood began to dry and crack around the wound. I've got some medical provisions in my cabin, Arabella said. Billy nodded and with her help, hobbled over to Arabella's cabin. It was very tidy for a pirate's room, with a neat little cot in a corner behind the only window, a writing desk, a large chest, and nothing else. Arabella sat Billy down on the cot, which was quickly stained with his blood. She helped him put his feet up and went over to the chest and opened it. She rummaged through some things and finally returned to some cloths. John, she called, can you fetch me a jug of salt water? Arabella set out the cloths as John delivered the jug. Anything else, mademoiselle? He asked, smiling. Arabella shot John an expression that Billy hadn't seen her yet exhibit. It was clear she wanted John to leave, but there was a playfulness about it, too. It was nice to see her not so serious. Right then, John said. Feel better, Billy. Before the young sailor closed the door, he winked at Billy and smiled. Billy shifted uncomfortably, both from the pain and the awkwardness of being alone in a room with a girl. I'm not going to hurt you, Arabella said, smiling. That didn't make Billy feel any better. Arabella grabbed the knife from the chest, and Billy jerked back. It's for your pants, you dolt. Arabella said, as she pulled Billy's trouser leg tight enough to cut through it. With the fabric gone, the wound was revealed. It was deeper than Billy had thought, though it didn't appear to have gone through the bone. Arabella pulled out a basin from beneath her cot. She lifted Billy's leg over it. Then she grabbed the pitcher that John had delivered, and Billy's eyes widened. He began to shake his head, but before he could protest, Arabella had poured the salt water over his wound. It felt as though she poured a gallon of fire over his throbbing leg. He let out an undignified yelp. "Oh, hush," Arabella said. "It'll not only clean your wound, but the salt will help you heal up." It felt as if all the blood in Billy's body had rushed to his wound and was pulsing around it. Arabella quickly grabbed a cloth and tightly wrapped his leg. Billy could see some blood seeping through the cloth, but after a while the blood stopped spreading and the throbbing started to settle down. "Thank you," Billy said, gritting his teeth. "You're welcome," Arabella said, smiling. She pushed him off the sheets and collected them. "You know, I'm sorry for not being so nice to you when we first met. It's just, well, have you seen me, Mum? I thought the woman was dead up until a few months ago. I once watched as another pirate pulled her from our tavern by the hair, with a sword in his hands. Of course, I expected the worst. Who wouldn't? Me dad became a drunk after we lost her, and I ran away from home. I went to sail the seas with Jack Sparrow, who you've heard a little about. And who do you think I bumped into on the high seas but Mum? It was hard to accept that she was alive, and a pirate, no less. It's not very easy being the daughter of a pirate. Not very easy to trust people when that's your background. You seem like a nice fellow. Not like the kind that come from pirates," Arabella went on, as she soaked and wrung out the sheets that had become soiled with blood. "I wouldn't know if my parents were pirates or cobblers," Billy said. "I never knew them. They disappeared when I was an infant." "What a pity," Arabella said, "not to know your parents." From outside the cabin, Billy could hear Laura barking orders. He cocked one eyebrow quizzically at Arabella. With a mother like that, could she really be serious? "Two men, we're not sailing quickly enough. Catch a better wind. John, get that darned cat away from me. Arabella, where in Davy Jones' locker are you, girl?" "Best be going," Arabella said. She looked thoughtfully at Billy. Then she smiled, leaned over, and kissed him on the forehead. Billy flushed. "Rest here," she said as she opened the cabin door to leave. From outside, Billy heard Laura snapping at Arabella. "Arabella, what were you doing lollygagging around? Are you not aware that I have a ship to run? You never listen. Never have. I should... What? Don't brush me off, young lady." Billy smiled and leaned back on the cot. He detected a salty, sweet scent on the thin pillow. It was the same one that he caught every time Arabella passed him by. It relaxed him, bringing him a state of comfort that he hadn't experienced since this whole crazy adventure had started. The floor was swaying gently, rocking Billy to sleep. As the rocking continued, Billy fell further and further into a deeper sleep. He dreamed of the Isle of Man and of North Carolina, of Crumbs and Aunt Erin and Uncle Seamus. He dreamed of Jack and what he might be like. He pictured him as a dashingly handsome, clean-cut sailor wearing a spotless, heroic captain's outfit. And he dreamed of Arabella. Alright, first of all, I love how Billy pictures Jack Sparrow as this handsome, clean-shaven guy with nice clothes. I don't know for sure, but to me, this seems like a little joke referencing the original appearance of Jack Sparrow before Johnny Depp was cast and started to create his own version of the character. If you don't know, the original Jack Sparrow design was a clean-shaven, handsome, Errol Flynn-esque character who also wore nice clothes. There's some great concept art of this by Daryl Warner if you search it up online. Of course, that all changed when Johnny created the now iconic version of Jack that we know today. And I don't know if this was an intentional reference or not, but it is pretty fun regardless. Anyway, Billy then wakes up as he feels the ship rock side to side. Then he hears Arabella scream from outside, so he runs as fast as he can with his hurt leg, grabbing a sword. So we're going to go back into the book and see what happens next. Just beyond the deck, the hugest, most vile, most wretched beast Billy had ever seen swayed over the ship. Its long, limbless body looked like a huge serpent. It had 2 fins beneath its jaw, which was filled with rows of foot-long fangs. Arabella had fallen to the deck right beneath the beast. She was looking up at it, trembling. Its huge pinkish form swayed to and fro as it attempted to hold itself erect over the ship. Foamy blue saliva dripped from its gaping maw and sizzled as it fell to the deck. It was like nothing Billy had ever seen before. Or had he seen it before? The tipping of the ship, the fin on its back. Billy was beginning to put the pieces together. This was the beast he had seen when he was on the Star, surrounded by dead sea creatures. Billy's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Laura at his side. "Can it see us?" Billy shouted. "I don't know, but I'm not sure it matters," she replied. Then she rushed over and pulled Arabella up as the ship continued to rock. It seems it's able to do enough damage to the ship whether we're invisible to it or not. The beast reared back, and the crew, which had all gathered on the deck, recoiled. Something that sounded like thunder rumbled from the beast's belly. Its face turned a bright reddish purple, and a visible lump made its way up to its throat. The beast seemed to breathe in, and then with a great hacking sound, spat all over the ship. Bits of chewed fish, entire shark carcasses, broken crabs, jagged shells, and chunks of coral rained down on the crew. The bits were covered in vicious goo, which stank like vomit. "Ugh!" Arabella cried as she shook a rotting, half-digested octopus from her arm. Billy blinked to clear his eyes with the filmy goo, then noticed a piece of wood beside him. If it weren't for the bright paint, it wouldn't have stood out among the other flotsam and jetsam with which the beast had spattered the deck. Billy noticed a partial word, A-N-E, painted on the wood. It looked familiar. He picked up the piece of wood and wiped off some of the slime. Anemone. His skiff. This beast, which he'd seen so often since he left the Isle of Man, had devoured his skiff. Could it have had the ability to completely deplete the waters around the Isle of Man of sea life? Billy looked up at its gaping jaws, which looked powerful enough to empty the Atlantic, and his question was answered. With a roar, Billy rushed to the broadside of the ship, where the beast was still hovering. As he approached, the beast growled fiercely and snapped at him. Billy leaped away, favoring his good leg, just barely escaping the beast's jaws. But he didn't escape its tail. The beast used it to wrap itself around Billy. Raising his sword, Billy slashed at the tail, causing the beast to let go. He fell to the deck. Behind him he heard the others gasp. "Billy!" Arabella screamed. He stood and began to approach the creature again. "It's the reason my family's starving," Billy cried over his shoulder. "It's the reason I'm out here at sea, and that I've been arrested and called a pirate. It's the reason I spent a night in a filthy holding cell and was forced to commit acts of treason." "Billy, what are you on about?" Arabella said. "Darling, I hope you weren't interested in this lad. He seems a bit, well, odd, even for you," Laura said. Billy moved toward the beast. "Billy, stop!" Arabella called out to him. "I've seen beasts like this before." "You have?" Laura said, taking it back. Arabella ignored her. "You need to get it in the heart," Arabella continued. "That won't be too difficult," Billy said, plunging his sword into the beast's midsection, which was directly in front of him. The beast howled as the wound gushed bluish blood. Billy smiled, but the beast reared back again, furious. "No, Billy, their hearts are located right under their jaws." Billy's eyes widened as he looked at the beast's open mouth. He quickly unwrapped his bandages. They were still damp with fresh blood. He sneered and began to wave them in front of the beast. "If he's anything like a shark," Billy said, "he'll smell this up there." Billy motioned to the beast's head, which was a good 20 feet above him. Sure enough, the beast dived toward the deck, snapping at the bloody bandages. It managed to slurp one up with its forked tongue, just missing Billy's hand. Then it resumed its position above the deck. Billy continued to wave his bandages, and the beast dived again. This time, just as it descended, Billy grabbed the fin right under the creature's jaw. The beast twitched violently, and Billy was tossed about like a rag doll. Billy managed to brace the foot of his good leg against the broadside and steady himself. This gave him a little more power over the beast, but he knew he didn't have much time. Using the sword he had only just begun to learn to wield, he slipped it in cleanly below the beast's jaw. He prayed that he had hit the right spot. A moment later, blue blood issued forth, and he was sure he had hit it in the heart. The beast jerked back over the ship and writhed around, spraying its blood all over the charmed sails of the Fleur de la Mort. The crew ran for cover, but Billy stayed put right under it. Finally, after what felt like eons, the beast crashed to the deck. Its head landed right in front of Billy, while its enormous body hung over the side of the ship, extending into the sea. Arabella ran to Billy's side and threw her arms around him. Despite the horror of the moment, Billy couldn't help but think it felt nice. Laura walked up to the beast and kicked it in the jaw. "I appreciate your valor, Mr. Turner," she said, "but now, if you'd be so kind, get this gruesome thing off my ship." "Yes, sir, ma'am," Billy replied. But Laura didn't notice his stammering. The captain's eyebrows were knit, and her expression looked fiercer than it had at any point during the short time Billy had known her. At first he thought she might be angry with him for some reason, but he quickly realized she was looking past him. Billy had his back to the sea, so he didn't know immediately what it was that had Laura and the whole crew of the Fleur, in fact, frozen in a state of shock, anger, and panic. "Oh, me stars," Arabella said. Her mouth dropped open in what was a nearly blank expression of terror and awe. Billy whirled around, and what he saw alongside the Fleur caused him to blanch with fear and boil with rage, all at once. So Laura then gives the order to ready the guns, and Billy notices that none other than the Sea Star is only a league away from them. But before she can give the order to fire, Billy interrupts her. So we're going to go back into the book and see what happens here. So Laura says, "Your mother had better be on that ship, boy," she said through gritted teeth. "Pardon, ma'am?" Billy asked. "That is about the only excuse I might grant you for what you've done." Billy hung his head. When he looked up again, he saw Arabella running over to her mother. "Mum," she cried, "cut the man some slack. After all, he saved me life. Twice." "I wouldn't care if he saved my own life 10 times, daughter. He's interfered with my execution of a vendetta that's been raging for years now between the Fleur and the Sea Star. That cannot be forgiven. It's in the code. Yes, I know," Arabella finished. "Funny how you pirates invoke that blasted code only when it's convenient." Speaking of the Sea Star," Mr. Reese said, "has anyone noticed how close it is to us?" Laura spat and cursed. Billy's eyes bulged. The Sea Star was now perhaps a half-mile away. The Fleur would never be able to get out of the star's path in time. It would be a miracle if the two ships avoided each other. "We only have one option. Furl the mainsail," Laura said, glaring at Billy. "Furl?" Mr. Reese said. "Captain, we're already at a disadvantage. Furling the sail will make us visible. Is it wise to do so? And further, a furled sail will prevent us from catching any wind. We are doomed to Davy Jones' locker already. If we—" "Do not question me," Laura said, and by Mr. Reese's expression, Billy could tell that Laura had rarely, if ever, blown up at Mr. Reese. "Aye, ma'am," he replied, and he hurried along with the rest of the crew to raise the mainsail. Once it was secured, shouts and murmurs could be heard from the approaching ship as the Fleur became visible, only a few hundred feet now lying between the two vessels. Billy could see the sails shifting, as every man on the deck of the Star seemed to be attempting to turn the great ship around. "What a way for it all to end, none?" John asked. "All these adventures with Jack and aboard the Fleur, and we get side-sloped by a ship that couldn't see us." Two men nodded. "I can't look," Arabella said, covering her eyes. Billy put his arm around her and pulled her close. She buried her head in his chest. Billy closed his eyes tightly and pressed his face against the top of her head. He remembered smelling her hair on her pillow not even an hour before. It's funny, he thought, the things you ponder right before you breathe your last breath. The screams from the approaching ship grew closer and closer, and then, a crash, the grinding and snapping of metal and wood, and the entire floor began to rock almost as severely as it had when it was attacked by the sea beast. Billy opened his eyes and pushed Arabella behind him. He was not going to die like this. He was going to get himself and the crew off the ship. And then he realized something. The Sea Star hadn't crashed into them head-on. It had managed to turn enough so that the broadsides smashed into each other. Billy was sure the ships would still have endured some damage, but it was possible that it wasn't so great. Billy's brief moment of relief ended when he realized the Sea Star was close enough for the Fleur to attack. Both decks were about the same height, and before any member of the Fleur's crew could react, the crew of the Sea Star were jumping aboard, waving their weapons above their heads. "Take no prisoners, but take the Fleur. Imagine, she can travel between worlds. Where else could it have been coming from to appear so suddenly before us?" Billy heard Captain Donovan yell. "Only Davy Jones' cursed Flying Dutchman is known to do such things. The crew aboard owe us in kind, as they slaughtered our pet beast. That beast that we once used to leech the seas of its fruits until men deserted their homes, possessions, even entire islands so that we could move in and acquire what was once theirs. But we will have no need for that monster any longer. We will have no need for meager deserted towns. With this ship, we will rule the Caribbean." "Pet beast," Billy said. Could it be? Could the Sea Star have been controlling the vile monster that swallowed all the fish from around the Isle of Man? That meant the Sea Star was responsible not only for landing Billy in prison, but also for forcing him to leave his home in the first place. "Pirates!" Laura cried to the other ship's men. "The Fleur has been pursuing you for 3 years now, since you captured the loot that was ours by right after we defeated the renegade pirate Left-Foot Lewis." "Pirates?" Billy said, not sure he could handle any further surprises. So the Sea Star wasn't a merchant vessel at all. Billy had been thrown in a filthy brig and branded a pirate by the Navy, when he might have been the only honest man aboard the ship. Billy felt something inside him that he had never felt before. It was as if all the anxieties he had had since boarding the Star had finally boiled over. But instead of being afraid of these feelings, Billy harnessed them into a power he never knew he had within him. He ran to Laura's side, swiped a sword from her waist, and ran, screaming like a berserker, toward the crew of the Sea Star. The crew charged him, and the Fleur's crew charged them back. "This is more like it," Laura said, smiling. Billy began swiftly slashing away at the Star's crew. The sword felt natural in his hand, as if he had been using one all his life. He pointed it at one sailor's chest, and the sailor fell overboard, between the Star and the Fleur. This method of disposing with enemy sailors met with a lot of success, and Billy managed to send a good portion of the Star's crew over the broadside, one after another, while carefully watching his own steps to assure he did not wind up among the waves with them. Behind him, the rest of the Fleur's crew was fighting ferociously. Arabella looked like an expert swordsman. Jean and Tuman made a great team, and Constance, well, of all the crew members, Billy thought she might be the most brutal. The cat looked at him and hissed, and he quivered before quickly turning his attention back to the fight. 4 men remaining, Arabella shouted, plus the captain and his mate. Billy looked over. Sure enough, Captain Donovan and Mr. Hawk were holding their own against the crew of the Fleur. This was unacceptable to Billy, and he ran over to battle them. But the remaining crew members ambushed him, and Billy was forced to spar with all 4 at once. "Billy!" Arabella shouted. She ran to him and began dueling with 2 of the 4 rival pirates. John and Tuman soon joined them, and the odds were once again even. Meanwhile, Laura was battling Captain Donovan, and Mr. Reese was sparring with Mr. Hawk. Tuman ducked quickly and sliced the pirate's leg with his obsidian blade. The pirate howled in pain, and Tuman pushed him over the balustrade. He winced as the pirate splashed into the sea. The pirate who was battling with Jean was caught off guard by his crewmate's fall from the ship. When he pulled his attention away from the young sailor, Jean quickly took advantage by poking him in the backside with his sword, forcing him to join his companion in the waters below. Meanwhile, Billy and Arabella were backed up against the Fleur's railing, slicing for their lives with their swords. They both had their backs to the railing and couldn't lean back any farther to avoid the returning swipes without running the risk of toppling overboard. "How are you doing?" Arabella asked, out of breath. "Oh, fine," Billy replied, attempting to sound confident. "Bear with me here, will you?" Arabella said. Sure," Billy answered. Before he knew exactly what was happening, Arabella leaned forward, kneed both men, and as they keeled over quickly, looped behind them. "Toss them, now!" she shouted. And without any hesitation, Billy planted a boot firmly on each of the pirates, jettisoning them from the ship. He and Arabella looked over the side, watching as the men splashed into the water, only to bob up again and begin struggling back to the Star. Looking at each other, Billy and Arabella smiled. "Ahoy! Battle's not over yet," Mr. Reese called out. He sounded desperate. The captain and the cook were not letting up. A streak of black shot across the deck and wove its way among the Sea Star's pirates' legs. Whatever it was, it caused the 2 men to topple over. The Fleur's crew rushed over, and all 6 members leaned over the captain and the cook, pointing their swords at them. "Constance!" John said happily. "You did it again, Belle." Constance was sitting on top of Captain Donovan, purring. She had been the black blur that caused the men to topple. Laura was breathing heavily. "Have you anything to say for yourselves before we toss you over?" she asked between gasps of air. Billy put up a hand. "No, these men have no right to speak," Billy said, "but I do." He glared down at the 2 men whom he had trusted at one time, not very long ago at all. "You lied to me," Billy said. "You tricked me, and when it was convenient you turned me over, though I'd wronged neither you nor the crown in any way. You made me believe you cared for me, that I had a great deal to learn from you. You and that beast tore me from my home, my family, my crumbs." "Well, I hardly think crumbs are anything to complain about losing," Laura mumbled. "Captain Smith," Billy continued, too angry to process Laura's comment, "I say that tossing these men over the broadside is too good a fate for them. Of course, they might be devoured by sharks, or Davy Jones might come for them, but they also might escape back to the Star. I propose that we deliver them to the very thing they were creating with their treacherous beast, a desert island where the chance of rescue is slim to none, and where they will be forced to live out the rest of their days knowing only each other for company and companionship." A sinister smile spread across Laura's face. It was clear she liked the idea. She liked it a lot. So the Fleur de la Mort maroons Captain Donovan and Mr. Hawk on a deserted island. After this whole experience is over, Billy realizes that he has found a sense of belonging on the sea. The book also lists what Billy was up to for the first 6 months on board the Fleur. Most of these things, like being captured by the merfolk, defeating Captain Torrance, and befriending Jack Sparrow, are all things we already know. But the book also mentions Billy evading the East India Trading Company twice, and also uncovering a plot to steal the stone that controls the tides. There's a footnote here that says these stories have yet to be told, and unfortunately, they have still yet to be told. And they probably never will be told, unfortunately. But then we go into a bit of an epilogue here, so let's see what happens. We'll go back into the book one last time. On a mid-April morning, months after he had first set sail on the Sea Star, Billy and Arabella docked a small boat, which Jack Sparrow had secured for them, off a calm, sandy beach. Early spring smells of honeysuckle and thawing earth were all around, and the air had that pleasant and mild feel that brought to mind a soft, light sweater. Billy stepped off the boat first and looked around. Arabella followed. "Are you sure this is the place?" Arabella asked. "Certain," Billy said, smiling. "That's what you said the past 3 times we docked, Billy." Billy didn't answer. There was something running toward him from the far end of the beach. Billy smiled and began to run to meet it. "Crumbs, boy," Billy said, starting to squat down to pet the dog that ran to meet him. Crumbs knocked Billy to the ground and pinned him there. He licked his face ferociously. "So this is your pup, eh?" Arabella said through a smirk. "Yes, ma'am," Billy said, sliding out from under Crumbs, who began to run circles around him. Arabella patted the dog on his haunches. "Pleased to meet you. I've heard a lot about you." Crumbs licked Arabella's hand fiercely and then barked, encouraging Billy to follow him. "I'm coming, Crumbs, I'm coming." The dog led Billy and Arabella up the beach and past some dunes to a quaint little cottage, which was handsome and well built. Billy looked at Arabella, who smiled and nodded. He took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into a neat and cozy living quarters. Aunt Erin looked up from her knitting. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell open. Her lip quivered. "Billy!" She rushed over to Billy and threw her arms around him. "Billy!" Another voice boomed through the room. It was Uncle Seamus's. "Welcome to North Carolina." Billy had never in his life felt more at home or at peace. He beamed as he looked around the cottage. A pot of something that smelled rich and tasty was boiling on the hearth. The room was sparsely but tastefully furnished. "Oh, Billy," Aunt Erin said, "when we sent you off aboard that ship, we were scared to death. We had no idea if we had done the right thing or what would happen to you." She looked at Uncle Seamus and nodded. "But in the end, it was the right thing to do." "I'd never believed the stories that here in America you could make so much money so quickly. But look at you. Look at us. And all this just by basket weaving." "It's truly amazing," Uncle Seamus said. Arabella and Billy gave each other a nervous glance. They weren't sure that Billy's aunt and uncle would believe the lie they came up with, that Billy had amassed a fortune weaving baskets. In truth, Laura Smith had apportioned an allotment of the Fleur's treasure to Billy in return for service aboard the ship. Billy knew that he could never tell his aunt or uncle that. It might kill them to think they were living off pirate loot. They knew nothing of what had transpired aboard the Sea Star, and Billy swore they never would. Aunt Erin, Uncle Seamus, this is Arabella. Arabella, this is Aunt Erin and Uncle Seamus," Billy said, steering the conversation away from his profession. "A fine career and a beautiful lass to boot," Uncle Seamus said. "We should have sent you over here ages ago." Billy smiled awkwardly. "No, it's not like that. She's a friend. Well, a co-worker. I work with her mum aboard a ship. That is, her mum transports my baskets." "No need to explain, Billy," Aunt Erin said, winking at Arabella. "Come, darling, I'll show you how to knit booties. I'm making some for Crumbs right now. The winters are surprisingly chilly here in North Carolina." "Thank you, Aunt Erin, but knitting's not really me thing. Oh, nonsense. Knitting is every girl's thing." Billy smiled wryly as Aunt Erin led her away. He saw her mouth the words "help me" as she was pulled into the sitting room. Billy just shrugged and laughed. A few hours later, Arabella had knitted her very first pair of booties, which looked more like lopsided coin purses, and Billy had hiked the beach twice with Uncle Seamus and Crumbs. And then it was time to go. Billy's heart sank. He wanted to stay for days, weeks, maybe forever. But if he were to keep his aunt and uncle, and Crumbs, living so comfortably, he'd need to get back aboard the Fleur and report for duty. "Why the Caribbean, lad? Why couldn't you just set up your basket shop here in North Carolina?" Uncle Seamus said. "It's just how it happened. The island of Barbuda is known for its basket weaving. It's the place to be if you're a basket weaver," Billy said. "I didn't know that," Uncle Seamus said. "Neither did I until I met that group of basket weavers aboard the Sea Star what taught me, basket weavery things." "Promise to visit us again soon," Uncle Seamus said. "I will. And promise to bring me some baskets next time you do," Aunt Erin said. "I could use some of those miniature ones for my berries." Billy suppressed a laugh. "I will." Crumbs rushed to Billy's side and licked his hand. The dog began to howl. "Don't worry, boy. I'll be back. Soon. I promise," Billy said, kissing the dog's head. He was pleased to see how much weight Crumbs had gained. He could hardly feel the dog's ribs as he patted his side. Arabella and Billy waved goodbye and made their way down to the beach and back toward the boat. Billy was barely able to hold back his tears. "You know," Arabella said, "I wonder what it'd be like." "What's that?" Billy asked. "No pirate mother, no half-crazed captains like Jack to bark orders at you, no invisible ships or pirate codes. Maybe just a little seaside cottage to relax in." Billy smiled coyly. He looked down at the crude booties she was holding in her hands. "Oh, and while you're at it, a baby too, then?" Billy said, laughing. "Sure, why not?" Arabella said. "A boy." "Well, I'm not sure that's the type of life for people like us. We're pirates, after all, lass." "Yeah, I guess you're right. Still, it's nice to think about, isn't it?" "Yes," Billy said. "Yes, it is." He took Arabella's hand, and they walked down the beach toward their boat. The surf was getting rough, and the waves beat violently against the boat. They were the kind of waves that could either help a boat speed along or warn of a terrible coming storm. The end. And that is the end of the tale of Billy Turner. That is officially the last book in the Young Jack Sparrow series. But this episode is not over yet. As I mentioned earlier, there are 5 short stories in this book as well, and we will summarize them in a bit. But we're going to take a quick detour and talk about the theory of the identity of Will Turner's mother, and how his mother could in fact be Arabella Smith. Alright, so there's a bunch of hints at this through different Pirates of the Caribbean books. So let's first go over the evidence. There are 3 major pieces of evidence to support this theory. First, we have what we just read, which is the ending of this book. Let's go over again what Billy and Arabella said to each other. So Arabella wonders, of course, how a nice, simple life could be, with a seaside cottage to relax in. Billy jokes at potentially having a baby, and Arabella says, "Sure, why not? A boy." And that is our first little indication of potentially this theory being true. Now, our next piece of evidence is something we haven't covered yet, and that is the first book in the Legends of the Brethren Court book series. We will be covering these on the podcast in the future, but since we are talking about this theory, I wanted to include it, as it is a significant piece of evidence in this mystery. So at the beginning of the book, Jack and Barbossa come to Tortuga, and Jack runs into Bill Turner. And they are older now, as this series takes place after the Young Jack Sparrow series and The Price of Freedom, so they're about in their late 20s. But Jack asks Bill to join the Black Pearl's crew, but Bill refuses since he says he has responsibilities now. Jack then asks Bill about his wife, and Bill says this: "She's doing very well, Jack. I know she'd love for you to visit, and then you could meet our son." What Bill says there in the beginning is that his wife would love for Jack to visit, which allows us to understand that they know each other. But anyway, Bill tells Jack that he has a son, and they named him William. Jack is sad that they didn't name the baby after him, and then Jack says this: "Someone who's always been a friend to you and that bonny lass of yours. Saved your lives on a number of occasions." So this is further proof that Jack knows Bill's wife, and that they are good friends, and he saved her life multiple times. And then we come to the last piece of evidence, which is from a book we also have not covered on the podcast, but I did make a video talking about it that I posted on the podcast social media accounts. This book I'm referring to is The Secret Files of the East India Trading Company. And what this is almost an in-universe lore book that is written by an EITC agent who survived the Battle of Calypso's Maelstrom. But anyway, there is a page that details the Young Jack Sparrow books, and more specifically his crew members. And in the passage detailing Arabella, it says this: "Arabella Smith is the daughter of a pirate, wed a pirate, and is mother to a pirate. Obviously, her mother is a pirate, we know that for sure. But we see here she also married a pirate and gave birth to a pirate. Bill Turner became a pirate, as we know, and Will Turner also ended up becoming a pirate. So this is further evidence that Arabella married Bill Turner and is the mother of Will." And that is all the evidence supporting the theory. But don't forget, we also learn a bit about Will's mom in The Curse of the Black Pearl itself. And Will says this to Jack: "When I was a lad living in England, my mother raised me by herself. After she died, I came out here, looking for my father." So from what Will tells us, his mother is dead, which would mean that Arabella would be dead if this theory is technically true. But before we piece this theory together, there's one more mention of Arabella Smith, and one thing that kind of changes this whole theory a bit. Outside of the books or the movies, there is something that references Arabella, and that is in the Disney parks. Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, to be exact. In the Caribbean Plaza area of the park, there is a restaurant called Tortuga Tavern. This tavern is actually the Faithful Bride, as it was renamed by, guess who? Arabella Smith, after she took ownership of the place. In the restaurant, you can find multiple references to Arabella, as there is a sign on the outside that has a portrait of a middle-aged version of her. The green bandana and the red hair definitely distinguish it as her, And on the inside, there's even a portrait of her that seems to be of when she was younger, more so of her likeness in the Young Jack Sparrow series. And to top it all off, there's a plaque inside that reads, A. Smith, Proprietor. Now, there's actually a really great video by That Disney Girl on YouTube that delves into the lore of Tortuga Tavern and also covers this theory as well. It's a really great video, very well researched, and I'll link that in the description of this episode if you want to check it out. But long story short, Arabella owns this tavern, which means she is still alive, but Will believes his mom to be dead. So this is where the theory gets into interpretation and speculation territory. Now, if we want to assume Arabella is still alive and running Tortuga Tavern, maybe the explanation is that she took after her mother Laura and left her kid to shield them from being thrown into the pirate life. That is exactly what Laura did to Arabella, and could be exactly what Arabella might have done to Will. We don't know when she died, so to speak, but maybe she dropped Will off at an orphanage and went back to Tortuga and took control of the tavern. It's also mentioned in the first book of the Legends of the Brethren Court series that Bill's family, meaning potentially Arabella and Will, are currently living in North Carolina, as we saw at the end of this book too. But in the movie, Will said that he and his mother lived in England, so maybe the two of them moved there. Or Arabella took him there to place him in an orphanage before leaving him to return to Tortuga. We don't know for sure, and we will probably never know for sure at this point. But with the constant hints through the books, it really does seem like they wanted Arabella to be Will's mother. And at this point, I've laid out all the evidence and pieced it together, so it is up to you whether you believe it or not. But I personally do believe Arabella is indeed Will's mother. But the transition now to the short stories at the end of this book. Let's quickly go through them. As I said, these are either deleted scenes from the books or stories that were featured online or in the Disney Adventures magazine. The first one is called Not So Calm Before the Storm, and it takes place before the first book in the series, which of course is called The Coming Storm. This story starts with Jack arriving in Tortuga and asking a man where he can get something to eat. The man tells him to go to the Faithful Bride, and he tells Jack he wants payment for the information. Jack tells him he has nothing but his sack, and after hearing this, the man takes the sack and tries to get away. Jack begins to fight him, and as they fight, a storm begins to roll in. He eventually knocks the man and his sack into the water, and he tries to look for him, but he can't see where he is. Then, Jack sees at the other end of the dock a dripping wet man that walks into town. Jack is perplexed then as to how the man went from one side of the dock to the other, but Jack begins to pursue the man he thinks is the guy that has his sack. But as we know now, this man that Jack begins to run after, who is dripping wet, is none other than Captain Torrance. Of course, the storm was also rolling in as Jack was fighting this man. So Jack begins to run after Captain Torrance without knowing it, and this is how Jack gets mixed up, thinking Torrance's sack with the scabbard of the Sword of Cortez is his own. The second story is called The Nosy Stranger, and it takes place between Book 2, The Siren Song, and Book 3, The Pirate Chase. Jack and the crew are on their way to Isla Fortuna, but the barnacle ends up getting stuck on a reef. Arabella notices that it is not actually a reef because it is moving and breathing. As the creature raises itself up, they notice it has no real shape, and it seems to be incredibly large. It's more like a blob than anything. Fitzwilliam draws his sword, but Arabella tells him it won't do anything to something that big. Jack says that a creature this large must also have a large nose as well. As Jack begins to scan the creature, the face appears with its eyes and nose. Jack draws his sword and rubs it in the nostril of the creature's nose, and the crew runs below deck to take cover. Then the creature sneezes and blows a massive gust of wind into the barnacle's sail, propelling it very fast. The crew then emerges and sees the deck, along with Jack, covered in a thick green slime, and they ask where the creature is, and Jack tells them the matter has been dealt with. So they then push on to Isla Fortuna. The third story is called The Bedeviled Egg, and it takes place during Book 5, The Age of Bronze. It specifically takes place when Jack and his crew have arrived in New Orleans and are looking for something to eat. The crew is trying to decide whether to find Madame Minuet or stop and eat, and since no one agrees with him, Jack takes off on his own. He eventually finds himself in a place called Pirate's Alley, and tries to find anyone who will sell him something to eat. A dirty woman in the back of the alley asks Jack if he is fond of eggs, and he gives her a gold coin, and the woman produces a perfectly round egg. Jack takes it and looks at it for a moment before putting it in his mouth, and as he is talking, he stops mid-sentence, and the world around him begins to change. Then he sees the most beautiful woman with a beaded hairnet in front of him. As he gets closer, a snake comes down the woman's arm and snaps at Jack, but before it bites him, everything goes back to normal. The woman then tells Jack the egg he had eaten showed him a glimpse of his future, and after she leaves, Jack forgets all about what he saw in the vision. The woman in the vision obviously was clearly Madame Minuit, but Jack forgets all about what he saw, and he makes his way back to his crew to find Madame Minuit. The fourth story is called The Mermaid Key, and it is not very clear as to when it takes place, but after reading it, I think it is probably between Book 4, The Sword of Cortez, and Book 5, The Age of Bronze. But anyway, Jack and his crew are thirsty and in need of water, and thankfully they come across a small island in the distance. Jack disembarks and makes his way down a gravel road, and eventually comes into contact with an old smelly fisherman. Jack asks the man where they can find some water, but the man gives Jack a key and tells him to be wise to the ways of the sea and not let the ladies have it. After this, the fisherman runs away as he's being chased by a swarm of killer bees, and Jack runs back to the barnacle. Later on, Jack is trying everything to see what the key could unlock, but he is unsuccessful. Then he notices that his crew is staring at the water in a trance-like state, and he realizes he is about to come in contact with the merfolk once again. A crowd of mermaids surface with Morverin among them. Morverin demands Jack to give her the key, saying that to unlock the sea is not your duty nor your right. Jack continues to refuse to hand the key over, so the mermaids begin to rock the barnacle back and forth, and the key flies out of Jack's hand. It falls into the sea, and the crew is released from the trance. And it is not stated in this story, but I believe this key that Morverin wanted so bad was actually the key to the chest that held the blue-tailed mermaid gem. If you remember from Book 12, Bold New Horizons, the blue gem was locked in a chest made by Calypso so that the blue-tailed mermaids would not be able to be controlled by Poseidon's tridents. That is my theory. And the fifth and final story is called The Cat's Meow, and it takes place after the first book in the series, The Coming Storm. John, Tumen, and Constance have been aboard the barnacle for 2 weeks now, and John is frantic because he can't find Constance. John tells Jack that Constance hates the sea and that she's no good near water, and Jack jokingly replies that a ship is the best place for her. John then tells Jack what happened the last time they couldn't find her, which happened to be only 2 hours ago. Apparently, Constance had gotten into a store of fish below decks, but didn't know it had gone bad, so John tells Jack she died from that, and Jack is annoyed that somehow she is still roaming around the ship. Jack then lists off the other times Constance had died, which include falling overboard while chasing a rat, falling from the mainmast, a nasty run-in with a butcher's cleaver the last time they were in port, a fatal game of hopscotch where she was trampled, and an allergic reaction. Arabella also adds that she was trapped in a treasure chest for 3 days. Jack then tells John that he does not believe for an instant that Constance is truly his sister, and he points out that she is currently hanging from the bowsprit. John tells Jack to save her since she has gone through 7 of her 9 lives. But then Arabella points out they forgot about the jaguar attacking Costa Rica, so actually Constance only has 1 life left. John is now panicking, so Jack rolls his eyes and grabs Constance off the bowsprit and gives her to John. He tells John to keep Constance off his cot from now on, and Constance replies by biting into Jack's boot. John begins to run away, and Jack runs after him, which leaves Arabella alone for a moment, but then she sees Constance rubbing against her leg with a rat in her mouth, and Arabella yells and joins Jack in running after John. And that is officially the end of the tale of Billy Turner and other stories, and the end of the Young Jack Sparrow series as a whole. I cannot believe that this is actually the end, and the fact that it's been literally half of a whole year that I have been living in this Young Jack Sparrow world, writing scripts, recording episodes and editing them, and also reading the books. I'll actually tell you guys something. I had not read this series for the first time until this year. And before the episode covering the first book in the series was released, I had only actually read the first 2 books. So I was essentially reading the next book and at the same time writing a script and producing an episode on the previous book, and I did that for almost 3 months. And I finished reading the series at the end of September, and I laid out the schedule for the rest of the episodes, which of course took us to this episode releasing right after the new year. At the time, I was like, oh my god, that is so far away. I'm covering these until 2025. And for the most part, I stayed on schedule. I only delayed an episode once throughout all 13 episodes. And it really has been an interesting experience, to say the least. And I feel so close to all these characters now because I've been living in this Young Jack Sparrow world for 6 months straight. They really do mean so much to me now, and I understand why these books are so beloved. They are so much fun, and I urge anyone who is listening and hasn't read them in full to do so. I know it is really hard to find some of them now because they've been out of print for over a decade, but they really are incredible and a fantastic addition to the world and lore of Pirates of the Caribbean. I hope I did the Young Jack Sparrow fandom proud. I know you all really adore these books, and I wanted to make these episodes as best as I could. As for what's on the horizon next, well, we are covering the big one. The Price of Freedom, the 600-page novel that takes place after this series, and is essentially the origin story of the Jack Sparrow we know from the movies. I just finished reading The Price of Freedom for the first time in full a month ago, and I cannot wait to talk about it. I'm so excited. And it's probably going to be multiple episodes to get through it all. But before we get there, I will be taking a break. 13 episodes in a row for half a year is a lot of work. And I want to make sure the Price of Freedom episodes are even better than these. So keep your eyes on the podcast social media for the announcement of when new episodes are coming. And I will be sure to post a date there once I have it set in stone. But as always, thank you so much for listening to this episode. And thank you even more if you listened to all 13 episodes covering all 13 books. I hope you've had as much fun listening as I did making them. And thanks to everyone who has rated or reviewed the podcast wherever you listen. It really does mean so much to me. And if you've reached out through email or DMs on social media, please know that it makes my day when you guys send me messages. It really does. As always, the link to buy podcast merch will be in the episode description, along with the YouTube video by That Disney Girl covering the lore of Tortuga Tavern. As we say goodbye to the Young Jack Sparrow series, a new door opens, or I guess I should say a new book opens, and that is The Price of Freedom. I will see you next time for the start of our new adventure, but for now, take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure to check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on TeePublic. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.